So we're going
Send me that, Jonathan.
Sorry?
Will you send me a copy of it?
I'll send you a copy, yeah. I'll send you a copy. Right, okay. Now, before we start on chapter 2 proper of Shmuel aleph, which is the prayer of thanksgiving or the poem of Hannah, I have to address the question that was asked several weeks ago by Paul Westbrook, a very difficult question, really, and that was, how come Hannah could sanctify and dedicate her son's life to the Mishkan without his permission for the whole of his life? She dedicated his whole life and said that he will be lent to the Lord for the whole of his days. And Paul asked a very good question and said, well, how does she have the right to do that? So we also spoke about, well, you know, we have a parallel here with Brit Milah. How do we have a right to chop a child's foreskin off without his permission? So I thought about this and I discussed it with Ravi Do. We didn't come up with any particularly clever answer, to tell you the truth. But the fact is that what we are somewhat doing here by asking this question, and it's a legitimate question, I'm not delegitimizing the question, but what we're doing is we are in some way applying the modern approach to life to the time that was going on then. And it seems that one of the Mefarshim do actually deal with this question in sort of passing. And what they want to say, I don't particularly find it satisfying answer, but what they want to say is that Shmuel was in the same category as Shimshon, which was that he was a Navi. Shimshon wasn't a Navi, he was a judge, but they wanted to say that Shmuel was a Navi from birth, or before birth, really, from the womb. It was ordained that he was going to be a prophet, a Navi, from the womb, as we heard with Shimshon, of course. With Shimshon's birth, we'll remember this, I'm sure, that Shimshon's mother was told by a malach, an angel of God, that Shimshon would be a Nazir, would be a Nazirite from birth, and that he would begin to save the Jewish people. But I don't find that very convincing with Shmuel, because there's a big difference there. With Shimshon, the angel tells his mother that's what's going to happen. Here, the mother decides it for herself without any, apparently without any Ruach HaKodesh. The Mefarshim bring in that, what I call sort of, get out of jail card, which is Ruach HaKodesh. Hannah had Ruach HaKodesh that Shmuel was going to be a Navi for the whole of his life. Now, I've never found that answer very satisfactory. The fact that it is said by the Mefarshim always leads me to believe that they are on the back foot with this, and that's a get out of jail card that they play only when they really have to. And so I don't find that particularly satisfying. There will be some that do. Paul, what about you? You happy with that?
Well, if she had Ruach HaKodesh, as you say, then she needn't have made any promises herself, because he was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me. And I think the answer really is that there isn't an answer, and that had Shmuel not been a good little boy and done as his mother has told, and decided that he wanted to go what we would call today off the derech, well then, he suppose he could have done. He wasn't a prisoner in the place. But I think the question that Paul has raised is a good question, and I think we have to remember that we can't apply today's approaches to child-parent relationships to what went on then. I don't really have a satisfactory answer, but I just wanted you to know that I did consider it and did discuss it. the best I could come up with from the real Meforshim was that it was Ruach HaKodesh, and from the sort of more rationalist approach, if you like, that was a desire of Hannah. She wanted him to be dedicated. She hoped he would be dedicated to the Torah for the whole of his life and to the Mishkan for the whole of his life. But at the end of the day, he always had an opportunity to walk away. And that's how I see it if we look at it in modern day terms. This was a desire for her. She took him to the Beis HaMedrash. She took him to the yeshiva, hoping that he would stay there and become a big Talmid Chacham. But at the end of the day, he could have walked away. So that's the best I can do for you. If anybody's got anything better than that, I'm happy to hear it. Howard and then Marcel. Howard first, then Marcel, then Johnny. Howard.
Shavua Tov, everybody. With rights, Johnny, come responsibilities. And there's always an age of criminal responsibility below which a child doesn't bear responsibility for its actions, and therefore it can be said fairly that it doesn't have rights, as its parents have the right to decide for him or her what he shall enjoy and what he shall suffer. If indeed Brit Milah should be described as suffering, a child may grow up and say, "Why did you not allow me to have a Brit Milah when I should have had it?"
That's the counter argument, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Marcel.
So rights and responsibilities, they go together.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Howard. I think that's exactly correct. And this whole concept of rights is very new, because 60, 70 years ago, it absolutely didn't exist. A child was seen and not heard. A child couldn't even decide what it wanted to do, what job. If the parents said you're going in the father's business or the grandfather's business, or you're going to do this, that's what the child had to do. It had absolutely no say in the matter. And even at that time, it was 21 years old. The child had no say under 21. He was a minor, and was not included in anything. And in Jewish law, under 13, he was not included. So it's this whole business of this rights. I don't know. I can't find the words to describe this. The strangeness of it. What the people.
Sorry, yeah, I'm sorry, Marcel. I muted you there by mistake. So if you've not finished, then unmute yourself. Sorry, that was. Okay, I think what Marcel is saying there is obviously absolutely true, of course, and that is that the pendulum of rights has swung rather a long way. I don't know that I would necessarily think that the previous world that we were in, where children had no rights whatsoever, was a good one either, but it certainly swung a long way where a child can have a right to decide whether he's a boy or a girl. And we've gone a bit bonkers with it, haven't we? So I suppose that's in a way what I was saying when I said we can't impose today's sort of approach to parent-child relationships to then. And what Marcel's pointing out is we can't even really compare it to 50 years ago. And I think that's absolutely right. Yes, Johnny Halpern.
No, I asked the question also previous to that one. Why did she ask for a boy? Why didn't she say, please just give me a child?
Right, and I think the answer to that is...
I can't remember if I got an answer or not.
I think the answer to that is tied up with the answer we've just given, and that is that she wanted him to be in the service of Hashem. She wanted a child she could dedicate his life to Hashem. And rightly or wrongly, and we can debate that another time, women were not serving in the Beit HaMikdash or the Mishkan. And so therefore, if she wanted to have somebody who was going to serve in the Mishkan, it had to be a boy.
I just thought she was desperate for a baby.
Okay. Well, yeah, but she wanted one that she wanted a baby that she could dedicate to Hashem. It was a lofty ideal, which we will see about in the next bit of the shiur, which we're going to talk about now, which is the text of chapter 2. So I think that's sort of as best as we can dealt with unfinished business. So let's move on to chapter 2 of Shmuel aleph. Can I just ask, because not everybody likes to see the words on the screen, and does everybody have a Shmuel aleph in front of them, or do you want me to put the words on the screen? Stick your hand up if you want me to put the words on the screen. Yeah, there's enough people that want it. Okay, so I will do that right now. Fine, there we go. Right, you got that on the screen now, yeah? Right, okay, so we are going to look at the prayer of Hannah. This is the second prayer of Hannah. You remember the first prayer was a prayer of request. This is a prayer of thanksgiving. Now that is in itself something which we should just stop and think about before we go rushing in. And it raises the issue of what is prayer. Prayer can be all sorts of things. It can be like Hannah's first episode that we read in the chapter 1, which was a prayer of request. She was desperate for a child. She prayed to God for a child, and that was praying for something. Here, we have a different type of prayer. We have a prayer of thanksgiving. And of course, those two types of prayer are still very prevalent in our world, aren't they? Because we have prayers of thanksgiving and we have prayers of request, and we have it all in one prayer. We have the same thing. Think about the Amidah. Think about the Shemona Esrei of weekday, which we say 3 times a day. Some of those brachot of the 18 or 19 brachot, some of them are prayers of request, are they not? For example, V'tein tal umata livracha, as we're saying at this time of year. And we're asking God to give us rain for a blessing. Some of the prayer in the Shemona Esrei is a prayer of thanksgiving. Think about modim anachnu lach. The actual word modim anachnu lach means we thank you or we praise you. So within the Shemona Esrei, I don't know if you ever thought about this, we have 2 completely different types of prayer. We are praying for things, and we're praying in thanks for having been given things. And this again is in some ways down to Hannah. You remember we spent quite some time in the last few weeks looking at the Gemara, which tells us how important this first prayer of Hannah was in teaching us how we should pray. This second prayer does the same thing in a way, in a more subtle sort of way, in that we have this idea of prayer being a dual fold, if you like, 2-fold type of prayer. Now, what's interesting, and this has always interested me, and I think in the past we have mentioned this in passing on various occasions, but I'd like to just spend a minute or two, probably longer than that, because it usually ends up being longer than that, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time just on this first word here, Vatit Palel Chana, which is translated in my Chabad website as Hannah prayed. And I think that was probably what it will say in the art scroll. Is it, Leon?
Yes, yes.
And I've got the Steinsaltz in front of me. Let's see what that says.
Also says prayed.
Also says prayed. Okay, so we're all agreed that the word Vatit Palel means prayed. Now, I have to just stop here and go into a little bit of Hebrew grammar. So, Avril, you can count this as part of your Ulpan. So you can get credits for this bit because this is a bit of Hebrew grammar. Vatit palel is a particular form of a verb called a hit pa'el. Not hit palel, but hit pa'el. And it's in English called a reflexive verb. And it usually means to do something to yourself. So, for example, to get dressed in the morning is lahit labesh. That bit of it, lahit means to do it to yourself. Okay, so lahit labesh is to get yourself dressed. Okay, lahit palel is a bit strange because what are you doing to yourself? It's a hit pa'el, which means it's reflexive. So in order to know what you're doing to yourself, for example, lahit labesh comes from the word lavush, which means clothing, right? Clothing. So lahit labesh means to put clothing on yourself. So to understand what lahit palel, to pray, means, we need to understand what the first part of the root, palel, means before we apply the reflexive bit. So lavush means clothing. Lahit labesh means to put clothing on yourself. So we've got a verb here, lahit palel, to pray. So what does palel mean? This second part of the word, palel. What does it mean? Now, I'm not going to put David Marks on the spot this week on these because these are very, very difficult questions. And even David, I think, will struggle with these. And I don't want to embarrass him. So, but he may be able to shout out ahead of me if he can tell us, if anyone knows, where we come across this word pei lamed lamed without the hit parallel. Because if we know what pei lamed lamed means, we can then apply it to doing it to ourselves and understand what prayer is. And it's a very important thing to know what prayer means. And this word lahit palel is going to give us a clue. So, the first time that we come across this verb, as far as I can see, is in Bereshit chapter 48, which I asked Leon to get ready. And you will see it is over there in verse 11. You should be able to see that on the screen in blue. Yeah? I'm going to take the blue off because it's easier to read without the blue. It's verse 11. Leon.
Israel said to Joseph, I dared not accept the thought that I would see your face. And here God has shown me even your offspring. Okay,
so this is when the dramatic moment when Joseph and his father Jacob are reunited after 22 years. Joseph has been sent down to Egypt, become a slave, become the second in command to Pharaoh. We know the story. Jacob comes down to Egypt and he says, Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, Israel, Jacob, that's his other name, of course. He said to Joseph, Ra'o panecha lo filalti. You can see that pei lamed lamed there. That's the root of our hitpalel. Ra'o panecha, to see your face, lo filalti. He translates it here as I had not expected. How does Art Scroll translate it?
I dared not accept the thought.
I dared not accept. Okay. How does Rav Steinsaltz translate it, Johnny? Have you got a Steinsaltz Chumash handy?
No, I haven't got one.
Okay, I will tell you. I've got it here. Let me have a look.
Johnny?
Yes.
The Hertz Chumash says I had not thought.
Ah, Hertz helps us out. Okay, good old Chief Rabbi Hertz. He says, I had not thought that I would see your face. Okay, let's see what Rav Steinsaltz says. Chapter 48, verse 11. Israel said to Joseph, I did not expect, but he has a discussion note on it. And he says, Some commentary. Listen to this. I hadn't read this before, but listen to this. This is great. Rav Steinsaltz says some commentaries associate this term with tefillah, prayer, understanding the phrase to mean I did not even pray for such a possibility. When I thought that you had been killed by a wild animal, I did not imagine that I would ever see you again. And he quotes the Radak. I know that David Marks is a fan of the Radak, so he probably already knew that. But interestingly, the Steinsaltz Chumash links the word filalti here to prayer. And he's saying that because tefillah means prayer, filalti here means that I hadn't even prayed that I would, didn't even dare to pray that I would see you again. What I'm suggesting to you is the other way round, that the word lehit palel, to pray, the word tefillah, which it actually comes from this source. And that is that this was something which he had really wanted for himself, but had not been able to get it for himself because Jacob could not bring Joseph back to life. Remember, he thought he'd been ripped apart by a wild animal. I couldn't pray for such a thing. I couldn't expect such a thing, as it says here. I couldn't imagine. I couldn't even think about something, which is what the Hertz translation is. And so all of these verbs, to think, to expect, to pray for, all of those things are then applied in our word lehit palel. Let's go back to Shmuel, vatit palel, and she prayed, on a reflexive form. So what it means is that you are working on yourself. I had not expected myself. I'd not thought. And so vatit palel chana means she thought to herself. She brought this back on herself. All the expectations, all the thoughts, as the Hertz Chumash says, all the expectations, as our translations have said, all the prayers, as Steinsaltz says, are turned on herself. And this is the important point about prayer. The reason that prayer is a reflexive verb, and it's a hit palel, and we don't say ani mit palel, we don't say ani mepalel, which is how it would be if it was a straightforward non-reflexive word. It's ani mit palel. You're turning it on yourself. In the same way as I say, ani mit labesh, I dress myself in the morning. Ani mit palel means that prayer itself is intrinsically something which you turn on yourself. If you are praying and it does not affect your inner self, then it's not a prayer. The whole point of prayer is that it affects the inner self. And this takes us to a much more sort of fundamental issue, I suppose, is, what is God that we are praying to? Who is God that we are praying to? When we're 5 years old, we think of God as an old man with a long grey beard in the heavens. Well, when we grow up, we sort of move on in maturity from that idea. That this benign old man like Father Christmas, Lahavdil, in heaven. So the idea of prayer is something which must have an effect on oneself, because if it doesn't, it is not a prayer. The word itself is telling us that we have to have our prayers must have an internal effect on us and make us into different people after the prayer than we were before the prayer. And if that doesn't happen, then it's not actually a prayer. Yes, Sharon.
Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov and happy Valentine's Day. I actually have spent some time following this word down the rabbit hole myself and looking at it, but having put all these textual contexts with it, rather than just looking at the word in a concordance, was really important to me today. And I think for me now, when I read that word or consider prayer, how about this thought? That it allows you to formulate a thought that is a prompting from the heart that often has no vocabulary. And the prayer is the focusing of those thoughts, emotions, concepts, experiences into something that you actually bring up enough to formulate it into a word of prayer. And so that another concept might be to formulate for oneself or to give oneself a vocabulary for the inner promptings of the heart, and that might work in most of these contexts.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I 100% endorse that. And as we will see, that is exactly what Hannah's prayer is all about. I wanted, before we go into Hannah's prayer, to focus on that word, because prayer is a very individual and personal thing. What I pray for is private to me. How I pray and what I pray for and to whom I pray and to how I pray is very personal to me, and everybody has their own personal ways of doing this. Some people see prayer as an unburdening of their problems, a bit like speaking to a counselor, that they go to pray, and having prayed, they say, right, well, it's God's problem now. And I'm divested of the stress of having this problem because I have poured my heart out, which again fits in with Sharon's explanation that this is a formulation of what's inside the heart. We know that that's the case with Hannah from her previous prayer, because we know that Hannah spoke to her heart. If I'm not mistaken, that was the expression. Let's just go back to chapter 1 and see if I'm right about that. There's chapter 1.
Verse 13.
Yes, there we go. I was right. Hannah hi medaberet al liba. She's speaking to her, well, not to her, al liba. She's speaking, al means upon or about, from, I guess, here. She's speaking her heart. She's speaking her heart out. She's pouring her heart out. And that fits very well with what Sharon has just said, which is that this is an idea of formulation of what is inside her heart. And that, of course, is therapeutic, and it enables one to, we often say, don't we, that if you can verbalize something, then it has some kind of concrete position to it, rather than an abstract idea that can't be verbalized or can't be concretized. So bearing that in mind, that is what prayer is about, I would suggest to you that when we are next praying, we think about what we're actually doing. And those of us, and unfortunately I include myself in this from time to time, try not to, but of course it's very difficult not to, who gabble off a prayer. You say your Shemona Esrei, there you go, done, finished. As Harvey Rosen used to have a big complaint when he had people who were davening from the Omid. He used to time them how long it took them to say Aleinu, and he would say that was a 17-second Aleinu. But if you look at the Aleinu prayer, it is a very deep prayer, and 17 seconds. Well, you can't hardly even say it in 17 seconds. You certainly can't do it justice. So let's just remember that vatit palel, prayer, is a reflexive verb. It's meant to have an effect on us. So that was just from that very first word. Now,
Johnny,
Johnny,
can I just say that Wikipedia says prayer is a conversation with God. Okay. Prayer is done by those who trust the power of word and thought.
Okay, so that raises the question of what is God. One of my answers to that is God. That God is that little bit of ourselves. We know that we have a bit of God in ourselves. So that actually fits, because for me, prayer is a conversation with myself and the bit of me that is godlike, and that's why it is a reflexive verb. Yes, David Marks.
Yeah. Those of us who have got Art Scrolls Sidurim, there's a lovely interpretation in the overview on tefillah and the word tefillah. Those who have got it, it's on page 13 of the introduction of the Art Scrolls Siddur. And again, he brings the definition that you've brought from Parshas Vayechi. There's also another definition that you find in yesterday's Parsha, the word pelilim, which means judgment. And part of the process, the concept of tefillah, is a kind, because it's in the reflexive tense as you described it, it's a self-judgment. And again, Art Scroll brings down that idea as well. Very well worth looking at that Art Scroll Siddur.
Thank you for that. Just before I go to you, Howard, Stanley has written to me on this chat there, why would we use formula instead of pouring our heart out, our own thoughts? And that's a very good question. You'll see here, and when we look at Hannah's prayer now, she of course is pouring her heart out, and these are her thoughts. My view is that if we were able, as Hannah is able, to pour out one's thoughts and heart in prayer, then that is better than formula. And that the formula that we are given is really, if you like, a b'di'evet. It's in the situation where we're not able to formulate things for ourselves. Now, there will be some people who would consider that to be heretical, and that the formula itself has holiness, which I don't disagree with, because these formulas were written by the Anshe Knesset Agdolah in some cases, and the Paitanim, those who wrote the poets over the generations, and these were great and holy men. So I don't dismiss the formula that we have as being worthless, but this is an entirely personal view, and I'm prepared to defend it against those that wish to shoot me down, but it is a personal view. If I'm given the option of a formula and pouring out my heart and my thoughts in a genuine and sincere way, then I would take the latter every time. I'm not going to tell you about these things because they're very private and personal, but I have, and I'm sure you can all think of them in your own lives. I can think of a number of occasions in my life where I have stood in prayer, I have stopped in the middle of my Shmona Esra, and I have poured my heart out. And then I have carried on with the formula. And if you're asking me which part of that prayer was most powerful to me, it was the personal pouring out and not the formula. But the formula is there because it's only rarely that we can reach those heights of pouring our own thoughts and hearts out in genuine prayer. And the formula is there, is intended to assist us to get our thoughts together, if you like, to put it in some kind of order, and to remember at all times all the things that we have to pray for and to thank God for and to ask for, etc. If you like, it's a bit of an aid memoir. But it's your question, Stanley, is quite acute, because given the opportunity, one should certainly use the time of prayer for pouring out one's own personal hearts and thoughts. Yes, Stanley, what have you got to say about that?
I want to say everything in life we have to train and we have to experience, because we're not trained. That's maybe to pouring our heart is maybe it's good time to stand up and to assess our life once in a time, because we usually go like a robots during the day. You know, you do this, you do this, you do this, okay, return, go to sleep and start a day from the beginning. We never have a time and thought, you know, like just slow down and look, what did you do today? What did you accomplish? What do you need it or you don't need it? you know, like something like that. And for that, you have to train as well. That's why talking to the formula sometimes it's so mechanical, you know, like we just boom, done. Okay, finish with it, go to next one.
Yeah, you're right. And of course, that's why the great rabbis, the holy people, spend a long time preparing themselves for davening. If you look in the Rambam, particularly, and other Sfarim, it tells you how to prepare yourself for davening. You may be aware that, for example, Chabad always start Shacharis later than anyone else. And you might think that's just because they get up late and they're a bit, you know, lazy. Not true. Not true. Well, it might be true, but I mean, that's not why they start late. They start late because they're meant to spend a couple of hours before they start davening, contemplating what they're about to do, learning various things that will get them in the right frame of mind for prayer. And the way it's meant to be done is exactly that, as Stanley has said. Unfortunately, most of us rock up at the last minute or after the last minute and don't prepare ourselves for that. And therefore, the formula becomes formulaic and loses its power. So without a doubt, this word vatit palel is teaching us not to be formulaic, but to be reflexive. It's exactly what that verse is saying. Look at yourself. Talk to yourself. Talk to that part of yourself which is deep inside, which is godly, whatever that means, and make it have an effect on you. And if it's formulaic and you run in and you run out, and at the end of it, you don't even know what you've said, or it's had absolutely no effect on you, I would suggest that you may have ticked the box that I've davened this morning or this afternoon, but it ain't really worth a great deal, if you want my honest opinion. But there you are. Leon.
Yes, this talk about prayer puts me in mind of a Dr. Goldberg, who was a member of my shul in Liverpool, Childwall Shul, who used to keep repeating parts of the Aleinu prayer. And I decided to watch and to listen to him. He sat about 2 seats away from me. And I got the feeling then that he felt that he wasn't concentrating on what he was saying and would go back either to the beginning or a few verses to try and concentrate on what he was saying. So he had the feeling of the prayer.
How long ago is that, Leon?
Rather a long time, about 70 years ago.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that is because I actually knew the answer to that question because you've told me that story before, and it's an amazing thing that you recognized it and remember it from 70 years ago. Obviously had a significant effect. The reason I ask that is that around about maybe 25, 30 years ago, time sort of is difficult to be clear about when you get a little bit older. But around about 25 or 30 years ago, I've still got this book downstairs in my library. A book came out called the Rosh Hashanah Survival Guide. And it was an American rabbi. I think his name was Rabbi Applebaum, if I could be wrong about that. It was a thin little book. It was purple and it had a picture on the front of a traditional synagogue, presumably in America, with a whole bunch of bored people on the front with their machzah upside down and clearly not having a clue what was going on. You know, one was talking to his neighbor, another was asleep, another one was picking his nose or whatever. You know, it was the picture was great. You got the idea that this was to prevent what this picture was. And I read this little book maybe 25, 30 years ago, and there's a lot in there which was very, very powerful. One of the things which I read in there, which I have never forgotten, and I still do to this day, and he says exactly what Leon has just said. He says, if you come across a phrase or a part of the tefillah, he was talking about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur because that's what this was about, but it applies to any tefillah. If you come across a phrase or a particular prayer that pushes your button, if you like, that says something to you, that speaks to you, he says, stop and repeat it over and over again and let it sink in to your consciousness. Let it come and become part of you. And I remember at one particular time, this really had a particular effect on me. And even to this day, every time I say this prayer, which is 3 times a day, I think about this. And this is just something personal from me, which I picked up from this book. And we read in the Shmona Esrei, we say, Modim anachnu lach. Let me get the words in front of me because I don't want to misquote them. Hang on. Here we go. We say, Modim anachnu lach. We thank you, Hashem. She'atahu Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokeinu. So you are our God, Le'olam v'ed, forever. And then we go on to say, Nodeh lecha. We thank you. Unesaper tehilatecha, and we speak your praises. And then we have these next few words, which really were very, very powerful to me and still are. Al chayenu hamasurim biadecha, for our lives, which we place into your hand. And by that, I understood it to mean the physical life. So our physical health, al chayenu, our physical life. We thank you for our lives, which we put into your hands. V'al nishmotenu, and our souls, hapekudot lach, which we entrust to you. And by that, I understood my spirituality, my soul, that bit of me that made me human. And remember, I'm saying no de lecha from the word todah. No de lecha. We thank you. So I'm stood here, I've just bowed down at Modin, and I'm saying, I thank you for the most basic parts of my entire existence. My life, my physical existence, al chayenu, v'al nishmotenu, and for my spiritual life that makes me into a human being and not an animal. V'al nisecha shebechol yom imanu, and for the miracles that are with us every day. The fact that we are in this wonderful land is a miracle. The fact that my great-grandparents were able to escape from Eastern Europe from persecution and to come to the UK and to become successful and decent human beings was a miracle. Okay, so this is personal to me. V'al nifla'otecha, and for your wonders, v'tovatecha, and for all the good things, shebechol 8 erev v'avok v'tzarayim, which are with me morning, noon, and night. Now, this is a very personal thing for me, and I'm sharing it with you because it's been raised, and to me, it's very powerful. Al chayenu, our lives, that's 1. Al nishmotenu, our souls, that's 2. Al nisecha, our miracles, that's 3. V'al niflotecha, the wonders, that's 4. V'tovatecha, and the good things, that's 5. This particular prayer has 5 specific different things that we stand and we thank God for from the depths of our heart. Now, for me, when that spoke to me, and the reason it spoke to me is because, Baruch Hashem, I have 5 children. And these 5 terms I applied in each, as I went along, to each one of my children. And in some ways, this prayer for me encapsulated everything that I have to thank God for through that. And it spoke to me. And this book that I told you about, where it said, stop if you find something that speaks to you, repeat it over and over again. And somewhere, I don't know if you've ever thought why it is that the rabbi of the shul always finishes Shemona Esrei last, and we have to wait for him to start the repetition. It's not that he can't read Hebrew and that he's a bit of a slow reader and he's struggling with the words. He can read it very nicely. But what he's doing is that he's finding things that speak to him. In the story that Leon's just told of Dr. Goldberg, what Dr. Goldberg was doing when he was going back and repeating those things, he had found a phrase I would like to suggest. It may well be that he hadn't concentrated enough on it, as you suggested, Leon, but I'd like to suggest that perhaps he found something in that prayer that really spoke to him, whatever it was, and he went back to it, and he was perhaps 40 years ahead of this little booklet that came out in the 1980s, and he was doing exactly what this little booklet, this survival guide for Rosh Hashanah, had taught me. That he was doing for himself back in Childwell Shul 70 years ago. And it's not about how quickly you finish or how slowly you finish or how much you say. It's about this verb on the screen at the moment that says Vatit Palel, how much the prayers have an effect on us as individuals, and how much the prayers that we express are a reflection, that same word, a reflection of what's inside our heart. And we'll see now when we come to Hannah's prayer that that is exactly what Hannah is doing. She is expressing that which is deep in her heart. And as Sharon said earlier on, what Hannah is doing is giving verbalization to those thoughts deep, deep inside her. And what we see, as we'll see when we go into these words now, we will see the psychology of Hannah coming out in torrents in this prayer. If we stop and analyze this prayer, as we will, we can see deep into the psyche of Hannah.
The words which you say in Modim, Johnny, when if you haven't got the right train of thought and you repeat them, can you repeat them verbally, or do you have to go over them in your mind?
I think you can repeat them verbally. Yeah, I think you should repeat them verbally. There is a halachic question if you can repeat the words of God's name in them, because you shouldn't keep on saying God's name. There will be some that would not be comfortable with repeating it. You may be aware that when we sing things, sometimes the chazan doesn't repeat. You know, when we sing Kedusha, for example, and we go over, sometimes the chazan doesn't repeat those things because there is an opinion that you shouldn't repeat the words. But if by repeating those words, you're actually achieving what the prayer is intending to do, if you were to ask me a halachic question, I would say, yes, you should repeat them because I think it's got value to it. If you ask somebody else the question, you might get a different answer.
Okay, Johnny?
Yes, Faye.
Okay. So this is actually something that I have brought up to the Rav from the first day that I came to the shul. Is how to slow the davening down so that you can, like there's absolutely no way that you can have kavanah in your davening, in your Shemona Esrei, if they're just zooming through it. You just can't, and you can't stop and say, okay, for all your niflaot and all your nisayot, and you can't. It's just impossible. So, and it's like the rabbi's answer was, well, then people start talking and then, we have to move on and they're in a rush to get done. How do we bring this consciousness to the shul? That's the question. Okay. And as a practical question, how do we do that? I just spent Shabbos at the Moshav and they do that. There's kavanah there and people, I finish davening and I have enough time to have kavanah in my davening. Yes, okay. I can finish. I can Zoom also. I know Hebrew well. I know the Shemona Esrei well. That's not what it's about. And how, can maybe a few shiurim, not even shiurim privately, like even a Devar Torah, can there be something, is there a place where it can be said? Maybe when we're talking about Chana's davening, which is when is that? Is that Shavuos?
Chana's davening.
Chana's davening is Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, yeah, Rosh Hashanah. Okay, the question that you've raised is a very, very difficult question, because there's a flippant answer, and to the flippant answer there is some truth, and I don't mean it to be flippant, but it sounds flippant, so I don't mean it to be flippant. And the answer is that if you feel that you get your tefillot better in the moshav, then that's where you should be. And I don't mean that in any unpleasant or negative way. It's a very difficult balance between something called tircha ditzibura, which the rabbis are very conscious of. I know that David Marks is very conscious of tircha ditzibura as well. He told me so himself. And tircha ditzibura means troubling the congregation. There are some rabbis who are particularly slow daveners, for the reasons that we've said, who say to their community, don't wait for me, because I don't want to put you out. So there's this balance between davening in a slow and deliberate way, which enables one to reach where you want to reach with your prayers, versus actually getting through the material. Now, there are different times, there are different types of people, there are different times of the year, there are different types of communities. I remember when my oldest son first went to Gateshead Yeshiva, and he came back after Rosh Hashanah, or I spoke to him after Rosh Hashanah, and he said that they'd started davening at 7 in the morning and finished at 4 in the afternoon, right? 9 hours. 9 hours for Rosh Hashanah davening. Now, for me, I couldn't concentrate for 9 hours. It just couldn't get through it. But for those people in Gateshead Yeshiva who had prepared themselves for the whole month of Elul and were in a holy environment, etc., 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 many of them will have had a tremendously uplifting experience. It's a big balance between getting the what you need to get out of the tefillah and the needs of a community, and unless you are living in a sort of homogeneous moshav like Faye has just described, where everybody is on a similar sort of level of consciousness about their tefillah. When I go to Manchester, I sometimes daven in the Hashkama minyan on Shabbat morning, and there they have a rule that no matter what the davening is, like this week we had 3 Sifrei Torah, we had Hallel, we had, it was a long do. They will finish at 9 o'clock. They start at 7:30 and they will finish at 9 o'clock, come what may. So for them, the idea of getting to the place of tefillah with kavanah is not important. What's important to them is to finish at 9 o'clock. Now, I'm not saying one thing or another. There's 2 extremes there. And to get that balance in a community like ours, where we have an entire range and spectrum of people in terms of spirituality, in terms of mysticism, in terms of rational Judaism, it's an impossible task. And one man's meat is another man's poison. If we were to spend as long as some people would like on the davening, other people would say, it's far too long. Why does it take so long? And if we were to speed up to do it as quick as some people would like, there will be other people that say, as Faye has just said, fair enough, fair comment, it's too fast. So, that's the conundrum of a community, which I don't think actually can ever be solved, except when you're in a homogeneous community like a Moshav or like Gateshead Yeshiva, when everybody is of like mind. But when you're in a community where people are not all of like mind, then it's very difficult. Okay, I want to actually at least read the Chana's prayer. That was the introduction to Chana's prayer. I think we've probably hit a record in our shir today. We go slowly, you know that. We have managed to do a whole hour on one word, Vatit Paleo. But I would like Leon, please, to read us the prayer of Chana. And next week, we will actually delve into the prayer and see into the depths of Hannah's psychology with this prayer. So I'm going to leave you with Leon's rendition of the prayer of Hannah, verses 1 to 10 of chapter 2. And next week, please God, we will start going into the prayer itself. In the meantime, I don't think the hour of discussion about Vatit Palel has been wasted, certainly not been wasted for me. I've certainly heard insights which from you, which will enhance, I hope, my prayer. So Leon, off you go.
Then Hannah, excuse me, then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in Hashem. My pride has been raised through Hashem. My mouth is opened wide against my antagonists, for I rejoice in your salvation. There is none as holy as Hashem, for there is none besides you, and there is no rock like our God. Do not abound in speaking with arrogance upon arrogance, for let not haughtiness come from your mouth, for Hashem is the God of thoughts, and men's deeds are accounted by him. The bow of the mighty is broken, while the foundering are girded with strength. The sated ones are hired out for bread, while the hungry ones cease to be so. While the barren woman bears 7, the one with many children becomes bereft. Hashem brings death and gives life. He lowers to the grave and raises up. Hashem impoverishes and makes rich. He humbles and he elevates. He raises the needy from the dirt, from the trash heaps. He lifts the destitute, to seat them with nobles and to endow them with a seat of honor. For Hashem's are the pillars of the earth, and upon them he set the world. He guards the steps of his devout ones, but the wicked are stilled in darkness. For not through strength does man prevail. Hashem, may those that contend with him be shattered. Let the heavens thunder against them. May Hashem judge to the ends of the earth. May he give power to his king and raise the pride of his anointed one.
Okay, thank you, Leon, for that. Beautifully read, as always. What a prayer that is.
Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous.
But there is so much in there which we will see as we go through it. It will probably take us a good few weeks to get through this, because there's just a ton of things there. I want to show you how this particular prayer has impinged on our own prayers in terms of language. I want to talk about what is troubling Hannah and how, as Sharon so clearly expressed, how her verbalizing and pouring out her heart, Vatit Palel here, is being cathartic for her. And that's what we will do, please God, next week. Before I turn off the recording, does anybody want to make some comments about this before I speak about a couple of other things which we don't need to record? Okay, let me switch off the recording then. Okay, there we go.